I remember the cold the way you remember a bad dream. Not the temperature itself, but the feeling it left behind. February 8th, 1990. I was a deputy with the Ashland County Sheriff's Office, and I had seen difficult scenes before. But nothing prepared me for that frozen field along Township Road 1181 in rural Ruggles Township, Ohio. A jogger had called it in at 7:42 in the morning. He said he almost missed it. The ground was hard and gray, and the winter brush sat flat against the earth. But something interrupted the natural pattern of the field, a shape that didn't belong, partially covered by overgrowth and the residue of months of cold weather. We sealed the perimeter within the hour. The forensic team moved carefully through the frost. I stood at the edge of the tape and watched them work, and I felt the specific weight of a case that was already too late. The shape in the field was a child. She was small. She was fully clothed, and she had been there for a long time. 105 days, we would later determine, give or take the margin that decomposition and cold weather allow. Ohio had been searching for her since October 27th, 1989. Her name was Amy Mihaljevic. She was 10 years old when she disappeared from a shopping plaza in Bay Village, a suburb where parents believed their children were safe. Standing in that field, I understood something investigators rarely say out loud. Sometimes the worst outcome isn't the end of the investigation. Sometimes it's the beginning of one that lasts forever. We had a body. We didn't have answers. And somewhere out there, the man who brought her to this frozen place was still walking free. To understand what happened to Amy Mihaljevic, you have to understand Bay Village in 1989. I grew up not far from there. It was the kind of place people moved to on purpose. Wide sidewalks, clean streets, houses with painted shutters and well-kept yards. People left their cars unlocked. Parents let their kids ride bikes after dinner without watching from the window. Crime, in the minds of Bay Village residents, was a city problem. Something that happened in Cleveland, 20 miles east, where the streets were harder and the neighborhoods less familiar. Not here, not in the suburbs. That belief wasn't careless. It was built from years of evidence, low crime statistics, community involvement, a police force that knew residents by name. Bay Village had earned its reputation as a safe place to raise a family. The trust was real. The routines were real. But trust, I've learned in this work, is only as strong as the people who decide to respect it. And in the fall of 1989, a man made a deliberate decision to exploit the safety that Bay Village families had built their lives around. He didn't break in. He didn't use force, not at first. He used the telephone. He used politeness. He used the one thing parents in quiet suburbs always teach their children to respect. Adults who seem to know things they shouldn't. He called Amy Mihaljevic at home. He called other girls too. And he did it carefully, methodically, over a period of weeks. By the time Bay Village understood what was happening, one of its children was already gone. Amy was the kind of child that teachers remember years later. Not because she demanded attention, but because she gave it so fully. She sat in the front rows. She followed instructions. She called her mother every afternoon after school without being reminded, because that was the routine, and Amy trusted routine the way most 10-year-olds trust the ground beneath their feet. She was bright and structured. She loved horses with the particular intensity that some children have for the things that make them feel free. She wore turquoise earrings shaped like horse heads, small, specific, hers. Her mother, Margaret, worked at Trading Times magazine in Bay Village. Her brother Jason was older, quieter. The family wasn't complicated. They were ordinary in the best sense of the word. What I pieced together from witness accounts, school records, and interviews with people who knew her is a portrait of a child who had been taught to do everything right. She checked in. She followed the rules. She trusted the adults in her world because the adults in her world had earned that trust. That's the part that has stayed with me through 36 years of working this case in one form or another. Amy didn't make a mistake. She did exactly what a responsible, careful 10-year-old was supposed to do. She believed she was helping. She believed she was being good. Someone engineered that belief from the outside, deliberately, over weeks, using her own best qualities against her. That detail doesn't leave you. It changes how you look at cases. It changes how you look at people. The call started weeks before October 27th. We know this from Amy herself. She told a friend about them. Partially, the way children share secrets when the secret becomes too interesting to hold alone. She didn't tell her mother. She was instructed not to. And she followed that instruction because the man on the phone had framed secrecy as part of the gift. He told her he worked with her mother at Trading Times magazine. He said Margaret had earned a promotion and he wanted to surprise her. He needed a child's help, a daughter's help, to pick out a meaningful gift. He made it sound official, warm, and generous. He called multiple times. He was patient. He built familiarity the way a contractor builds a foundation, slowly, deliberately, below the surface where no one could see. Investigators later determined that Amy wasn't the only target. Other girls in North Olmsted, a neighboring community, had received similar calls. Several of these girls had unlisted phone numbers, which meant the caller had access to something the general public shouldn't have had. The lead that stood out to early investigators was the Lake Erie Nature and Science Center. Many of the contacted girls had signed a visitor's log there. Their names and phone numbers were right there in a book. Someone had used that book. Someone had stood at that same counter, looked at those pages and written down names. He wasn't impulsive. He wasn't reactive. He was selecting. And somewhere in the process, Amy Mihaljevic became the one he chose to follow through with. That distinction between the girls he called and the one he took has haunted this investigation for decades. October 27th, 1989 was a Friday. Warm for late October. Unseasonably so, the kind of day that felt borrowed from an earlier month. Amy left school that afternoon wearing a pale green sweatsuit and her riding boots, the one she loved. She did not go straight home. Instead, she walked to Bay Square Shopping Center, a small plaza not far from her school. She went there because the man on the phone had asked her to meet him there. He had made it sound like the next step in the plan, the gift, the surprise, her mother's promotion. She was helping. She was being responsible. Bay Square was busy that afternoon. It sat directly across from a Bay Village police station. In any reasonable calculation of risk, this was one of the least vulnerable locations in the suburb. People were coming and going. Traffic moved through the lot. Witnesses saw Amy there. Two of them, interviewed separately, described a white male standing with her near the plaza entrance. He was adult, average build, unremarkable in appearance. The kind of person a witness struggles to describe in detail afterward because nothing about him triggered alarm. She didn't pull away. She didn't look frightened. She looked like a child who trusted the person beside her. That image, a 10-year-old girl walking calmly with a man she believed was safe in broad daylight across from a police station, is the clearest picture we have of how organized this offender was. He didn't need darkness. He didn't need isolation. He needed her trust. And he already had it. At 3:40 in the afternoon, Amy called her mother at work. Margaret McNulty, Amy's mother, told investigators it was a short call. Amy said she was at the shopping center. She gave brief answers. Her responses were careful, almost clipped, like a child choosing her words because someone was listening over her shoulder. She didn't say anything was wrong. She didn't ask for help. She said she was fine. That phone call became one of the most studied pieces of evidence in the case. Former FBI agent Robert Ressler, who worked on the behavioral analysis of this case in the years following Amy's disappearance, told investigators he believed the killer stood beside Amy during that call. He was monitoring her, controlling what she said, using the call to buy himself time before anyone realized she was missing. That interpretation is consistent with the call's unusual brevity and tone. Children who are fine don't give one-word answers to their mothers. Children who are frightened, but who have been told to act normal, do. The call ended. Margaret returned to work. She had no reason to believe her daughter wouldn't be home in an hour, following routine the way Amy always did. 5 minutes after that call, at 3:45, Amy's brother Jason arrived home from school. The house was empty. He waited. He called their mother. In the gap between 3:40 and 3:45, in the ordinary minutes between a phone call and a brother walking through a front door, something irreversible happened. Amy Mihaljevic was gone, and the man who stood beside her during that call believed he had done everything right. Margaret drove to the school first. It was an instinct, the place where the day had started, the last known point before the afternoon became uncertain. Amy's bike was still there, locked up at the rack where she had left it that morning. That bike told us everything and nothing at the same time. It confirmed Amy had arrived at school. It confirmed she hadn't cycled to the shopping center. And it confirmed she hadn't come back. By 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Bay Village police were notified. Officers moved quickly. A missing child report in a quiet suburb was treated seriously from the start. They canvassed the area around Bay Square. They interviewed the witnesses who had seen Amy in the parking lot. By evening, the suburb that prided itself on its safety was illuminated by the cold, methodical light of a police investigation. Neighbors gathered on their front steps. Parents called their children inside earlier than usual. The confidence that had been built over years, that sense of invulnerability that made Bay Village feel different from other places, began to crack. What I noticed, reviewing the initial response reports years later, was how quickly law enforcement recognized that this wasn't a simple runaway case. Amy had no history of disappearing. She had no known conflicts at home or school. She was, by every account, a child who came home on time. The phone calls, the ones about the promotion, the gift, the secrecy, came to light within the first 48 hours. A friend Amy had told about them came forward. That changed everything. This was not a child who had wandered. This was a child who had been led somewhere by someone who had spent weeks preparing her for that exact moment. Within days, Amy's face was on every television in northeastern Ohio. Within weeks, it was on national broadcasts. America's Most Wanted ran the case. Tips flooded in, hundreds of them, then thousands. A volunteer network formed spontaneously, the way communities sometimes respond to unbearable things. They called themselves Amy's Army. Parents, teachers, church members, teenagers who didn't know Amy but understood what her disappearance meant. They printed flyers. They drove routes. They distributed millions of leaflets across the state. The investigation was thorough. I want to be clear about that. Bay Village Police, Cuyahoga County investigators, and FBI personnel all worked this case with genuine urgency. Tips were categorized, followed up, cross-referenced. Composite sketches were developed from witness descriptions of the man at the shopping center. But he had vanished as cleanly as he had appeared. No vehicle description, no name, no license plate. The witnesses described someone ordinary, someone designed, it seemed, to blend into a suburban parking lot on a warm Friday afternoon without leaving an impression. What grew in the absence of a clear suspect was something harder to manage: fear. Not just in Bay Village, but across Ohio. Parents changed routines. Schools held assemblies. Unlisted phone numbers didn't feel safe anymore. The case exposed something that communities like Bay Village had never been forced to examine. Safety is not just about locks and lights and good intentions. It can be targeted. It can be studied. It can be dismantled by someone patient enough to take it apart from the inside. Amy had been gone for weeks, and the questions were multiplying faster than the answers. When the forensic team finished its work in that Ashland County field, we had facts. Facts matter in investigations. They anchor everything else when the emotional weight of a case threatens to pull the reasoning off course. Cause of death: stab wounds to the neck and blunt force trauma to the head. Time of death: estimated shortly after the abduction on October 27, 1989. The window was small. Whatever had happened to Amy had happened fast, geographically and chronologically close to Bay Village. Ruggles Township was roughly 60 miles southwest of Bay Square Shopping Center. Someone had driven that distance. Someone had chosen that location: rural, isolated, a dirt road with low traffic and wide agricultural fields. That choice was not random. The decision to deposit her remains in Ashland County, far from the abduction site, suggested geographic knowledge. The killer knew the area, or had scouted it, or had a reason to be in that part of the state. That detail would generate years of leads, mapping exercises, and suspect cross-referencing. But what stayed with me from the initial forensic report, what I kept returning to in the months that followed, was the time of death estimate. Shortly after the abduction, that phrase contained an entire tragedy inside it. She had been taken from a parking lot in broad daylight, driven 60 miles, and killed. The window between that phone call at 3:40 and her death was devastatingly short. Whatever Amy experienced in those final hours, she did not survive long enough for anyone to find her. The search that had occupied an entire state for 105 days had already been over before it began. The stomach contents changed the picture in a way that was both scientifically significant and deeply human. During the autopsy, investigators found evidence of a recent meal. Soy-based food consistent with artificial chicken, the kind found in Chinese takeout or certain processed products. He had fed her. That detail meant Amy was alive for some period of time after the abduction, long enough to eat. It raised immediate questions about location. Where had they stopped? Where had she sat across from this man and consumed food without knowing? What was coming? The geographic window between Bay Village and Ruggles Township opened up in a new way. Every restaurant, every drive-through, every location along a reasonable route became a potential scene. Investigators reached out to establishments. They reviewed sales records where possible. They chased down leads that mostly went nowhere. But the behavioral implication was what interested the FBI profilers most. Feeding a victim before killing them suggests either a delay in planning, emotional conflict in the moment, or a calculated effort to keep the child calm and cooperative during transport. None of those interpretations made the picture easier. What it told us was that the offender had a process. He wasn't purely impulsive. There was some internal logic operating, some pattern of behavior that felt coherent to him, even if it was incomprehensible to us. Understanding that logic, getting inside the behavioral framework of an organized, socially competent predator, became a central thread of the investigation for the years and decades that followed. He had driven 60 miles with a child, fed her, and then killed her. And somewhere in that sequence was the key to who he was. The fiber evidence was the kind of detail that sounds small until you understand what it means. Yellow gold, trilobal synthetic carpet fibers, recovered from Amy's clothing during the forensic examination of her remains. Trilobal means three-sided in cross-section, a specific manufacturing profile. The color and construction were consistent with automotive carpeting from a particular range of vehicles produced in the mid to late 1980s. This wasn't a fiber from a house. It was a fiber from a car. His car. Investigators began the painstaking process of cross-referencing vehicle types against the suspect pool. This was 1990. There was no digital database that could be searched with a query. Every lead was manual. Vehicle registrations, employer records, parking permits, witness recollections. The fiber sat in evidence storage as the years passed. But it didn't lose its value. Physical evidence doesn't degrade the way memories do. It waits. What I came to understand about this case, and about cold case investigations in general, is that evidence collected at the beginning of an investigation often becomes most powerful at the end of it. The people who processed Amy's clothing in 1990 couldn't have known that the fibers they cataloged would still be relevant in 2025. But they preserved them anyway. That discipline matters. For items from Amy's person were never recovered. Her black leather boots, her denim backpack with red piping, a binder stamped with the Buick logo, and her turquoise horsehead earrings. Their absence was telling. In homicide investigations, we call items retained by an offender trophies. They serve a psychological function, a private connection to the act, a way of revisiting what was done. Someone still had those earrings. Somewhere. In 1990, approximately 1,000 feet from where Amy's body was recovered, investigators found two additional items, an avocado green handmade curtain and a store-bought blanket. Their significance wasn't immediately clear. They didn't match anything in Amy's household. They appeared to have been used to wrap or cover her remains before or during transport. But the handmade curtain, a specific domestic object, sewn rather than purchased, pointed toward a personal origin. Someone had made that curtain, or known someone who made it, or lived somewhere it hung on a window or a door. For years, those two items sat in the investigative record as unresolved. Forensic technology in 1990 had limits. You could note the items, photograph them, document their condition and location. But extracting actionable information from degraded fabric in a rural field was beyond what was available at the time. I returned to them repeatedly over the years. Every time technology advanced, I requested new analysis. It felt like returning to a locked door with a new key each time, waiting for the one that turned. The breakthrough, when it came, didn't arrive the way breakthroughs look in movies. There was no single dramatic moment. There was a lab report quietly delivered that changed everything we thought we understood about how Amy's body had traveled from Bay Village to that field. Microscopic hair analysis. That was the key. Not the curtain's fabric, not its construction, but what had attached itself to its surface during the time it spent in someone's home. The curtain had been there, in his space, long enough to collect evidence of the life lived around it. The hair analysis result took time to process. Not scientifically. Technologically, that part was relatively straightforward once the right methods were applied. The processing that took time was the investigative kind, the kind that requires you to sit with a finding and follow every thread it generates. Hairs recovered from the avocado green curtain were microscopically compared to samples from the Mihaljevic family. Most were eliminated as expected, but one subset matched samples from Jake, Amy's family dog, a detail confirmed through comparison with hair samples collected from the family home. Dog hair transfers from a person's clothing to other surfaces through contact. Amy had been around Jake. Jake's hairs had traveled with her, attached to her clothing or skin. When she was wrapped in that curtain, some of those hairs transferred from her to the fabric, which meant the curtain had been in direct contact with Amy after the abduction. And before it was used in that field, it had been somewhere else, in a home, or a vehicle, or a space that belonged to the killer. The curtain didn't come from Amy's house. It came from his. That single chain of evidence, from a family dog to a dead girl to a handmade piece of fabric found in a frozen field, gave investigators the clearest physical link they had between the victim and the offender's environment. He had wrapped her in something from his own life. That curtain had hung somewhere he lived. He had taken it down, used it, and left it behind thinking it would tell no stories. He was wrong. It just took 30 years for the story to become audible. The FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit built a profile of the unknown male in the years following Amy's disappearance. I worked alongside the investigators who incorporated that profile into the active investigation, and it shaped how we thought about the suspect pool for decades. Organized offender. That was the consistent finding. The phone calls demonstrated patience and planning. The choice of a public abduction location, busy, visible, across from a police station, demonstrated confidence. The geographic distance between abduction and body recovery demonstrated knowledge and preparation. He was socially competent, not a recluse, not visibly disturbed. Someone who could hold a telephone conversation and sound authoritative. Someone who could stand beside a child in a parking lot without triggering alarm in passersby. Someone who knew how suburbs worked because he lived in them, or worked in them, or moved through them comfortably. The profilers noted a likely behavioral shift after the crime. In cases involving organized offenders, the period following a killing often produces observable changes. Increased alcohol use, sudden absences from work or routine, social withdrawal, or conversely, hyperactive normalcy as a form of camouflage. Someone in his life had noticed something in October or November of 1989. Someone had seen a change and perhaps filed it away as personal trouble, a bad week, stress. People rationalize the behavior of those they know. It's not dishonesty. It's the natural human instinct to reach for the least alarming explanation. But somewhere in a memory 36 years old, the answer to this question might still exist. The investigation generated hundreds of persons of interest over the decades. I reviewed many of them myself. Some are superficially compelling. The right geography, the right vehicle, the right profile characteristics. Most evaporated under sustained scrutiny. But in 2021, one name emerged with more substance than the others. William McClellan. I'm not going to overstate what we had. Investigators were careful, deliberate, and specific about what the evidence did and did not show. A former girlfriend came forward with statements she attributed to McClellan that she said had stayed with her for years. two witnesses, shown a modern photo array, identified him as resembling the man they had seen with Amy at the shopping center. His vehicle matched the profile consistent with the yellow-gold trilobal fibers found on Amy's clothing. He failed a polygraph examination. No charges were filed. That matters. Polygraphs are not admissible in court. Witness identifications from photo arrays are subject to challenge. Statements made years after an event carry limitations that prosecutors take seriously. But McClellan's name didn't disappear from the investigation either. He remained a significant person of interest, which in investigative language means, we haven't ruled you out and we haven't stopped looking. Cases like this one, where conviction requires a level of forensic certainty that 1989 technology could not provide, often arrive at a legal stalemate that isn't the same as innocence and isn't the same as guilt. We were caught in that space. Evidence that pointed without proving. Suspicion without the finality that justice requires. The suspect landscape in the Amy Mihaljevic case was never simple. For every person of interest who moved toward the center of the investigation, another emerged from a different direction, and the picture refused to resolve cleanly. Robert Ivan Nichols was one of those other figures. His story was strange, even outside the context of this case. Nichols had lived under an assumed identity for years in northeastern Ohio. A man with a different name, a different history, a constructed version of himself that he maintained with the kind of discipline that suggested long practice. He died by suicide in 2002, when his true identity was unraveled by investigators. The details placed him in proximity to the geography and time frame of the abduction. Secretive, isolated, a man who had built his life around concealment. Investigators examined him carefully. The evidence was reviewed. The geographic overlap was noted. But no definitive link to Amy's case was ever announced. Without physical evidence connecting him to the crime scene, without DNA, without a witness account that specifically named him, the investigation could not close around his name. He remained in the record, not cleared, not charged, simply present in the file as one of many threads that had been pulled without fully unraveling. What cases like this teach you is that proximity and behavioral similarity are not proof. A man could be secretive and troubled and geographically convenient and still be entirely uninvolved in a specific crime. The discipline of investigation requires holding those two things at the same time, suspicion and restraint, without collapsing one into the other. We hadn't found our answer yet, but in 2024, something happened that restarted the forward motion entirely. In late 2024, a routine arrest in Huron County, Ohio, a man taken into custody on an assault charge, created an unexpected moment in the investigation. One of the people present at the scene noticed something. The arrested man bore a resemblance to the original composite sketch developed from base square witnesses in 1989. Not a vague resemblance, a specific one, notable enough that it was reported to investigators working the Mihaljevic case. I want to be careful about how this is described. Resemblance to a composite sketch is not evidence. Composite sketches, even good ones, are reconstructed memories filtered through witness perception, artistic interpretation, and the natural imprecision of the human visual system. They point in directions. They do not identify. Investigators responded appropriately. They examined the lead carefully. They reviewed the age-appropriate timeline. They asked the right questions without making the wrong announcements. The public was cautioned, a word I've come to appreciate in cold case work. Hope is a powerful and sometimes damaging force in an investigation this old. Families hear a name, and they begin preparing themselves emotionally for a resolution that may not come. Communities organize around a new suspect, and then the evidence, examined with the rigor it requires, points somewhere else. The Huron County lead was investigated thoroughly. It did not produce a breakthrough, but it did remind everyone, the investigators, the journalists, the Bay Village community, the people who had carried Amy's memory for 35 years, that this case was still alive, that someone was still watching, that the unknown male had not escaped into permanent invisibility. He had simply not been found yet. In the spring of 2025, A development arrived that was different from what had come before. Different in quality, different in specificity, different in what it might ultimately mean. Advanced photographic visualization techniques, methods that weren't available in 1990 or 2000 or even 2015, were applied to Amy's recovered clothing, specifically her sweatpants and underwear. These techniques enhanced visual resolution beyond what standard examination allowed, revealing structures in the fabric that earlier analysis had missed. Human hairs, multiple samples, previously undetected. They were removed carefully under controlled conditions and subjected to DNA analysis. The initial results confirmed what investigators had hoped. The hairs did not belong to Amy. They did not match her family members. The nuclear DNA profile of the hairs was consistent with an unknown male. For the first time in 36 years, we had genetic material from the person who killed Amy Mihaljevic. I am careful with that word, had, because having genetic material and identifying the person it belongs to were separated by significant scientific and logistical distance. The samples were degraded. The hairs were shaft samples, not root samples, which complicates the standard DNA extraction process. But the field of forensic genetics had advanced considerably, and what had been impossible in 1990 was no longer impossible in 2025. The samples were packaged. The documentation was thorough. And the next step, the one that might finally answer the question this investigation had been asking for 36 years, began. The unknown male had left a piece of himself behind. He just didn't know it yet. The samples traveled to two specialized forensic laboratories, one in California, one in Florida. Both facilities had experience with degraded DNA, cold case evidence, and the specific challenges of extracting nuclear profiles from hair shafts under adverse conditions. The technique they would use was called next-generation sequencing. It's a method that works differently from traditional DNA analysis. Rather than identifying a profile through a single targeted process, NGS reads the genetic material in fragments, assembles those fragments computationally, and builds a usable profile from the reconstruction. It is slow. It is expensive. It requires significant expertise at every stage of the process. And it is not guaranteed to produce a result. Mitochondrial DNA, the kind extracted from hair shafts in earlier decades of forensic work, can identify a maternal lineage, but it cannot distinguish between individuals. A son and his brother share the same mitochondrial DNA. It narrows possibilities but doesn't close them. Nuclear DNA is different. Nuclear DNA is individual. It belongs to one person and no one else on Earth. If the laboratories could successfully extract and profile the nuclear DNA from these hairs, we would have a genetic fingerprint that identified a single human being. We had submitted approximately 250 suspects to the DNA database over the years. None had matched. But genetic genealogy, the process of using partial DNA profiles to search commercial ancestry databases and identify relatives, had opened new possibilities. The unknown male might not be in a law enforcement database, but he might have a cousin or a grandchild or a sibling who had taken a consumer ancestry test. Science had given us a path forward that didn't exist in 1989. While the samples were being processed in California and Florida, I spent time reviewing the case files in a way I hadn't done in years. Not looking for new leads, just sitting with the record, the way investigators sometimes need to do when a case approaches a potential resolution. Margaret McNulty died in 2001. She spent the last 12 years of her life without answers about her daughter. I met her once, in 1995, at a community remembrance organized by Amy's supporters. She was composed in a way that comes not from indifference, but from the kind of grief that has been lived with so long it becomes part of the body's posture. She thanked the investigators who were there. She said she trusted that it would eventually be resolved. I thought about that trust often. It wasn't naive. It was a choice, a deliberate decision to hold on to faith in a system that had, to that point, failed to deliver the answer she deserved. Mark Mihaljevic, Amy's father, still participates in remembrance walks. The Amy Fund, established by the family and community members to support continued forensic testing, has directed resources toward every credible scientific development that emerged over the decades. The Bay Village community has aged. The children who distributed flyers in Amy's army are now adults in their 40s and 50s. The parents who gathered on their front steps that October evening in 1989 are grandparents now, some of them gone. The evidence has not aged. That asymmetry, human memory fading as physical evidence holds its ground, is the promise at the center of cold case forensics. What the Amy Mihaljevic case reveals about the nature of predatory behavior is worth examining directly, because the patterns it exposed in 1989 did not disappear when Amy disappeared. They have reappeared in different forms across the decades since. The gift pretext, the phone-based grooming, the exploitation of a child's desire to be helpful and responsible, the careful selection of a victim with unlisted contact information, sourced from a public log. These are not the methods of an impulsive criminal. They are the methods of someone who studied behavior, identified vulnerabilities, and constructed an approach designed to exploit specific psychological mechanisms in a specific type of victim. In 1989, we called it sophisticated. Today, behavioral criminologists have language for every component. The social engineering, the trust-building phase, the isolation technique, the staging of the abduction in a high-visibility environment as a demonstration of confidence. That confidence is what stayed with me the longest. He took her from across the street from a police station, in daylight, with witnesses present. That choice was not accidental. It was a statement, not to us because we didn't understand it immediately, but to himself. A test of his own method, his own control of the environment he had spent weeks building. He believed he was untouchable. 36 years of investigative failure had, in a certain dark light, confirmed that belief. But evidence collected by careful, disciplined professionals in a frozen field in February 1990 had been waiting quietly for technology to catch up with it. That wait was almost over. The laboratory results from California arrived first. They were preliminary, partial, promising, not yet definitive. The Florida laboratory's analysis was ongoing. What the California results confirmed was that nuclear DNA extraction from the hair shaft samples was viable. The degradation, while significant, had not destroyed the material entirely. The computational reassembly of fragmented sequences was producing a readable genetic map. It was not a complete profile. It was not yet ready to be submitted for a database match or a genealogical search, but it was enough to confirm that a complete profile was possible. I received the notification on a Tuesday morning. I read it twice, then set it down and looked out the window at a street that was quiet and ordinary in the way Bay Village streets were quiet and ordinary in October 1989. I thought about Amy's earrings, the turquoise horse heads, wherever they were. I thought about the curtain, avocado green, hanging in someone's home before he took it down and used it to wrap a child he had killed. I thought about the phone call at 3:40, the short answers, the man standing close enough to monitor every word. I thought about what it would mean to finally have his name. Not just for the case file, not just for the courtroom argument that may or may not ever happen, but for Margaret's memory and for Mark's endurance and for the community that has held this loss for 36 years without resolution. The Florida results were expected within weeks. The unknown male was still unknown, but the distance between where we were and where we needed to be had never been smaller. There are questions in this case that a DNA profile, even a complete one, will not answer. I've thought about this carefully because I think it matters how we talk about what resolution means. Justice in the legal sense requires evidence that meets a specific standard. A name derived from genetic genealogy is a starting point, not an ending. It leads to investigation, to physical evidence cross-referencing, to the long and careful work of building a case that can survive scrutiny. If the unknown male is still alive, a DNA identification opens a prosecutorial path that didn't exist before. If he has died, as Robert Ivan Nichols died in 2002, as other persons of interest have died in the years since, it provides a different kind of resolution. Not justice in the courtroom sense, but confirmation. An answer. Neither outcome restores what was lost. That's the part that true crime coverage sometimes fails to sit with long enough. Margaret McNulty wanted to know who killed her daughter before she died. She didn't get that answer. Nothing that happens in a laboratory in 2025 changes that. Derek lost his mother when he was a child, and the absence she left was permanent before any investigation concluded anything. What forensic science can offer is the truth, eventually. The name, the confirmation, the closing of the open, factual question that has defined this case for 36 years. That's not nothing. For families who have carried an unanswered question through decades of their lives, it is in fact everything they've been waiting for. But it is not the same as what they deserved from the beginning, which was for this never to have happened at all. The broader legacy of the Amy Mihaljevic case is written into policies, programs, and precautions that most people today take for granted without knowing their origin. The gift pretext call, the method used to lure Amy, generated specific safety education campaigns in Ohio schools and eventually nationwide. The concept of a trusted adult verification system, teaching children to confirm any unusual adult contact with a parent before acting on it, became embedded in child safety curricula partly because of what happened in Bay Village. The visitor log at the Lake Erie Nature and Science Center was a vulnerability that was identified, examined, and eventually addressed. The idea that public records, sign-in sheets, contest entry forms, community event logs, could be sources of personal information for predators shifted how institutions thought about what information they collected and how it was stored. None of that prevented Amy's death. These changes came after. They always come after. There's a painful truth at the center of child safety policy history. Nearly every protection we now teach was learned from a specific child who wasn't protected. The procedures exist because a real person paid the cost of the gap. Amy was one of those people. Her death contributed to a body of knowledge that may have prevented other deaths that we will never be able to count or name. I don't know whether that constitutes meaning. It's not comfort. It's the complicated, imperfect legacy of a tragedy that should never have occurred in a suburb where parents believed their children were safe. The belief was wrong. The children were real. On February 8th, 1990, I stood at the edge of a frozen field in Ashland County and looked at what remained of a 10-year-old girl who had trusted the wrong person. I am still standing in that field in some part of my mind. I don't think that will change. What I know now that I didn't know then is that evidence endures. That the fibers on a child's clothing, the hairs on a curtain, the genetic material left behind by a man who believed he was invisible. These things survive. They wait. They resist the passage of time in ways that human memory cannot. The unknown male who stood beside Amy Mihaljevic during her final phone call at 3:40 on October 27, 1989, who placed his hand on her shoulder in a parking lot in broad daylight, who drove 60 miles through Ohio with a child who trusted him, who left her in a field and believed he had covered every trace of himself, left behind more than he knew. The science is working now that wasn't working then. The Amy Fund continues. The investigation is active. The Ashland County field that held Amy for 105 days is long since returned to ordinary agricultural use. But in the investigative record, in the forensic labs in California and Florida, in the DNA profile that is assembling itself from fragments recovered from fabric and fibers and 36-year-old hair, the case is moving. Amy Renee Mihaljevic was 10 years old. She wore turquoise earrings. She called her mother every afternoon. She was brought to that field by a man who thought he would never be found. We're still looking. If this story stayed with you, if you felt the weight of what Amy's family has carried for 36 years and the painstaking work of investigators who refuse to stop, then you already know what this kind of storytelling is for. It's for her. It's for every family sitting with an unanswered question. At True Crime Files Gist, we don't just cover cases. We follow them. We track the forensic developments, the investigative breakthroughs, the moments when science finally catches up to what happened in the dark. If this story mattered to you, please like this video right now. It helps more people find Amy's story who need to hear it. Subscribe to True Crime Files Gist so you never miss a case we cover. And share this video with someone who follows true crime, because the more people who know Amy's name, the harder it becomes for the unknown male to remain unknown. Justice moves slowly, but it moves, and we'll be here when it does. True Crime Files Gist, real cases, real justice, real people.